The November rain hammered against the tall windows of the Ashford Hotel like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. Boston's financial district sprawled below, a maze of steel and ambition barely visible through the downpour. Inside the boutique hotel's lobby, warm amber lighting fought against the gloom of the late afternoon, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Elena Sawyer stood behind the mahogany reception desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed down her crisp burgundy uniform. 3 weeks. She'd been working at the Ashford for exactly 3 weeks, and the knot in her stomach still tightened every time the revolving door spun, bringing another guest into her domain. This wasn't just any hotel. It was where tech moguls, politicians, and old money families stayed when they wanted discretion wrapped in luxury. "You're doing fine," her supervisor Monica had told her that morning, though Elena caught the hint of doubt in her voice. "Just remember, anticipate their needs before they ask. That's what separates us from the chain hotels." Elena glanced at the clock, 4:47 p.m. Her shift ended at midnight and already her feet ached in the required heels. She adjusted the small nameplate on her uniform, Elena Sawyer, Guest Relations, and took a deep breath. The lobby was relatively quiet now, just a couple in the corner studying a map and an older businessman reading the Wall Street Journal near the fireplace. The revolving door suddenly spun with force and a man strode in, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gesturing sharply as he spoke. Elena recognized him instantly. Everyone in Boston would. Marcus Thornton. His face had graced the cover of Forbes twice in the last year alone. At 45, he carried the kind of presence that turned heads without effort. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes and dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. "I don't care what the zoning board says, Richard." Marcus's voice cut through the lobby's quiet elegance like a blade. "We've dealt with worse. Find the angle and exploit it. That's what I pay you for." He didn't break stride as he approached the desk, ending the call with a decisive tap and sliding his phone into his pocket. His eyes met Elena's for half a second. Cold, assessing, already moving past her to the elevators beyond. "Mr. Thornton," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome back to the Ashford. I hope—" "Penthouse key," he interrupted, not unkindly but with the efficiency of someone who measured time in millions. "And have them send up the usual. You have my preferences on file." "Of course, sir." Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up his profile. "Presidential suite. Booked through the weekend. Preferences: black coffee, no cream, specific bottled water brand, newspapers delivered by 6 a.m., do not disturb until noon. No personal calls transferred to the room." She handed him the key card in its leather holder. "You're all set, Mr. Thornton. The suite is ready and I'll make sure everything is sent up within 15 minutes. He took the key without looking at it, already turning toward the elevators. "Fine." Elena watched him disappear behind the brass elevator doors, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She'd heard the stories. Marcus Thornton was brilliant, ruthless, and had built Thornton Enterprises from a single property development into a billion-dollar empire spanning the East Coast. She'd also heard the whispers about his personal life, the wife who died in a car accident 7 years ago, the estranged daughter nobody saw anymore, the impenetrable wall he'd built around himself. The evening crept forward. Elena checked in a young couple celebrating their anniversary, arranged a car service for a departing guest, and fielded 3 calls about booking rates for the spring. By 7:30 p.m., the lobby had emptied considerably, and she allowed herself a moment to sit on the stool behind the desk, hidden from view. That's when she noticed it. A black credit card lay on the marble counter, partially hidden beneath a brochure for Boston Harbor tours. Elena picked it up, her breath catching. The card was heavier than normal plastic, with a distinctive metallic sheen. Marcus Thornton was embossed in silver letters, along with a symbol she recognized. An invitation-only black card with virtually no spending limit. Her heart began to race. He must have set it down while she was processing his key, distracted by his phone call. She glanced at the elevators, then at the clock. Should she call up to his suite? The profile had specifically noted, "Do not disturb," but this was his credit card. Surely that warranted an exception. Elena reached for the phone, then hesitated. Monica's voice echoed in her memory. "These guests value their privacy above everything. If you interrupt unnecessarily, they'll remember, and not in a good way." She turned the card over in her hands, feeling its weight. Most people would panic over losing something like this. But Marcus Thornton probably had a dozen backup cards, each connected to accounts with more zeros than Elena could imagine. Would he even notice it was missing until he tried to use it? The rational thing was to simply secure it in the safe and inform him via email. But something stirred in Elena's chest. A memory from 3 weeks ago, before she'd started at the Ashford. She'd been volunteering at the Children's Hospital in Cambridge, reading to kids in the oncology ward when she'd met a little girl named Sophie, 7 years old, bald from chemotherapy, with eyes that still sparkled when Elena did funny voices for the storybook characters. Sophie's mother had been there too, exhausted and grateful for the brief moment of normalcy Elena provided. The foundation that paid for her treatment. They saved our lives, the mother had whispered. We'd lost everything just trying to keep her alive. Then they stepped in. Elena had asked which foundation, and the mother had shown her the pamphlet, the Sarah Thornton Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research. Below the name was a photo from 7 years ago, a benefit gala, with Marcus Thornton and his late wife Sarah smiling at the camera, her arm around a young girl Elena assumed was their daughter. She'd read about Sarah Thornton later that night, killed in a car accident returning from a foundation event. The foundation she'd built from the ground up, inspired by her own childhood battle with leukemia. After her death, Marcus had continued funding it, but only financially. He never attended events, never made public appearances on its behalf, never spoke about his wife or the cause she'd died supporting. The card felt even heavier now in Elena's palm. An idea began to form. Crazy, probably career-ending, but impossible to shake. She looked at the computer screen, at Marcus Thornton's profile with its cold efficiency and deliberate isolation. Then she looked at the card, at this tiny piece of power she held temporarily in her hands. What if she did something with it? Not for herself, that would be theft. But what if she made a donation in his name to the foundation his wife had loved? Would it remind him of what he'd lost? Or would it awaken something he'd buried? Elena's practical side screamed warnings. This is insane. You'll be fired. You could be arrested. But another part of her, the part that had held Sophie's tiny hand and promised to come back and read more stories, whispered something different. Maybe he needs to remember. The lobby phone rang, startling her. She answered automatically, her mind still churning. Guest relations, this is Elena. Hey, it's Trevor from Concierge. We've got a guest asking about late-night dining options. Can you pull up the list? Sure, 1 second. She set the card down, helped Trevor, then stared at it again when she hung up. The clock showed 8:15 p.m. In her pocket, her own phone buzzed. A text from her roommate asking if she wanted leftovers saved. Elena ignored it. She opened a new browser window, typed in the foundation's website, and found the donation page. Her finger hovered over the mouse. This was the moment. Cross this line, and there was no going back. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the windows. Elena thought of Marcus Thornton alone in his penthouse suite, surrounded by luxury but suffocating in isolation. She thought of Sophie, fighting for her life with a smile. She thought of Sarah Thornton, who'd built something beautiful and left it behind. Then Elena Sawyer, 26-year-old novice receptionist who'd never made an impulsive decision in her life, entered the card information and selected the donation amount, $50,000. Her hand shook as she moved the cursor to the complete donation button. One click. That's all it would take. She closed her eyes and clicked. The screen processed for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then, donation successful. Thank you for your contribution to the Sarah Thornton Foundation. Elena stared at the confirmation page, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. What had she just done? The elevator dinged. Elena's head snapped up and she quickly closed the browser window, sliding the black card under a folder. The doors opened, and a different guest stepped out, an elderly woman heading toward the restaurant. Elena exhaled. She had maybe an hour, maybe less, before the transaction appeared on Marcus Thornton's account. Before he saw it. Before her entire world came crashing down. But as she looked at the hidden card, then at the dark windows reflecting her pale face, Elena realized something surprising. She didn't regret it. Not yet, anyway. Marcus Thornton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. The rain streaked down the glass in chaotic patterns, distorting the city lights below into abstract smears of color. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, thinking about everything he'd spent 7 years trying not to think about. The suite was exactly as he'd requested. Impersonal, efficient, devoid of anything that might trigger a memory. Neutral gray walls, modern furniture with clean lines, abstract art that meant nothing. The hotel had learned years ago that Marcus Thornton didn't want charm or character. He wanted a sterile box where he could work, sleep, and avoid the ghosts that waited for him at his empty house in Beacon Hill. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. Marcus glanced at it. An email from Richard about the zoning board meeting rescheduled for Monday. He should care. The Seaport District development was a $200 million project, the kind that would cement Thornton Enterprises as the dominant force in Boston real estate for the next decade. But tonight, he couldn't summon the energy to care. He set down the scotch and moved to his laptop, opening the files for the Seaport project. Numbers, projections, architectural renderings. They usually grounded him, gave him purpose. Tonight they just looked like pixels on a screen, as meaningless as everything else. His phone buzzed again. Then again. Marcus frowned. Unless it was an emergency, his assistant knew better than to contact him after 8 p.m. He picked up the phone and saw 3 notifications from his bank's app. Unusual activity alerts. He unlocked the phone, his frown deepening. The first notification. Large transaction detected on account ending in 4721. Amount $50,000. $. Marcus's jaw tightened. His black card. He reached for his wallet automatically, then stopped. He'd had the card at the hotel desk, had set it down while that young receptionist processed his key. Had he picked it back up? He checked his wallet thoroughly. Not there. Not in his suit jacket pockets. Not on the desk or nightstand. Damn it, he muttered, opening the banking app. If someone had stolen his card and was running up charges, he'd have it canceled and deal with the headache of... He stopped. The transaction details loaded on the screen, and Marcus stared at them, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something he couldn't quite name. Transaction. Donation to the Sarah Thornton Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research. Amount $50,000. Euro. Time 8:16 p.m. Location Boston, MA. Marcus read it 3 times, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Sarah's Foundation. Someone had used his card to donate to Sarah's Foundation. $50,000. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. It had been 7 years since he'd heard that name spoken aloud in his presence. 7 years since he'd allowed himself to think about the foundation Sarah had poured her heart into, the cause that had taken her away from him on a rainy night just like this one. She'd been driving back from a fundraising gala, exhausted but exhilarated because they'd raised over $1 million. The other driver had been texting, crossed the median, hit her head on. Sarah had died instantly. The drunk driver had walked away with a broken arm. After the funeral, Marcus had written a check to keep the foundation running, a large enough endowment that it could operate indefinitely without his involvement. Then he'd severed all connection to it. He couldn't bear to see her name, couldn't stand the reminder of what she'd sacrificed for those children, couldn't face the board members who looked at him with pity and expectation. His daughter Lily had begged him to stay involved. "It's what Mom would have wanted," she'd said, 15 years old and drowning in grief. But Marcus couldn't. So he'd thrown himself into work instead, building his empire larger, his walls higher, until even Lily had given up trying to reach him. Now someone, some stranger, had used his card to force that name back into his life. Marcus grabbed his suit jacket and headed for the door, fury building with each step. This wasn't just theft or fraud. This was violation. This was someone reaching into his carefully constructed world and dragging out the one thing he'd buried deepest. The elevator seemed to take forever. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. A hacker? An identity thief with a twisted sense of irony? Or, the elevator doors opened to the lobby and Marcus's eyes immediately found the reception desk. The same young woman from earlier stood there, her dark hair pulled back, her face pale as she typed something on the computer. She looked up as he approached, and Marcus saw it instantly. The flash of recognition followed by fear. She knew. "Mr. Thornton," Elena said, her voice carefully controlled despite the tremor he could detect underneath. "Is everything all right with your suite?" Marcus placed both hands on the marble counter, leaning forward slightly. His voice came out low, dangerous. "Where's my credit card?" Elena's face went a shade paler. "Your credit card, sir. Don't play games with me." Marcus's steel gray eyes locked onto hers. "I left my black card on this desk approximately 3 hours ago. I want it back. Now." "Of course." Elena's hand shook slightly as she reached under a folder and produced the card. "I found it after you went upstairs. I was going to secure it in the safe and send you an email. Did you use it?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena's throat worked as she swallowed, and Marcus saw her make a decision. A tiny straightening of her spine, a lift of her chin. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." The admission was so unexpected, so brazenly honest that Marcus actually took a step back. "You're admitting to credit card fraud?" "I made a donation," Elena said, her voice gaining strength, "to the Sarah Thornton Foundation. $50,000 in your name." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Whether it was anger or something else, he couldn't tell. "You have no right." "You're right, I don't," Elena interrupted, and now her eyes met his fully, no longer afraid. "I'll be fired. I might be arrested. But that foundation has saved lives, Mr. Thornton. Children's lives. And it was started by your wife, who died trying to raise money for it." "Don't you dare!" Marcus's voice rose, drawing looks from a couple near the fireplace. "I met a little girl 3 weeks ago," Elena continued, her words tumbling out now like she couldn't stop them. "Sophie, 7 years old, fighting leukemia. Her treatment was paid for by the Sarah Thornton Foundation. She's alive because of what your wife built, and I thought," her voice cracked slightly, "I thought maybe you'd forgotten. Or maybe you needed to be reminded that something beautiful came from your tragedy." Marcus stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You thought you could play therapist with my money and my grief?" "No," Elena said, tears now visible in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. "I thought I could honor a woman who spent her life saving children. And I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd want to remember her for something other than how she died." The lobby had gone completely silent. Marcus was dimly aware that they had an audience now, but he couldn't look away from this audacious young woman who'd just shattered his carefully maintained control. "Call the police," he said coldly. "I'm pressing charges for credit card fraud." Elena nodded, her face now calm despite the tears. "I understand, but I won't apologize for the donation, Mr. Thornton, only for doing it without your permission." Marcus took his card from the counter, his hand steady despite the chaos in his chest. He turned toward the elevator, then stopped. Without looking back, he said, "What's your name?" "Elena Sawyer." "Well, Elena Sawyer, I hope whatever point you were trying to make was worth your career." He walked back to the elevator, not waiting for a response. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Elena standing behind the desk, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sadness, yes, but also something that looked almost like disappointment. In him. Back in his suite, Marcus stood at the window again, the city blurred by rain and something else he refused to name. His phone sat on the counter, the banking app still open to the transaction details. The Sarah Thornton Foundation. He thought of Sophie, whoever she was, a 7-year-old girl he'd never met, saved by money he'd provided but never acknowledged. How many Sophies were there? How many children had Sarah's foundation saved in the 7 years since her death? Marcus opened his laptop and typed the foundation's name into the search bar. The website loaded. He hadn't looked at it in 7 years. Sarah's photo smiled at him from the homepage, younger than he remembered, full of life and purpose. Below it, lives saved, 847 children and counting, 847. His vision blurred, and Marcus finally admitted what he'd been feeling since seeing that donation. Not just anger at the violation, but something deeper, grief. The raw, unprocessed grief he'd been running from for 7 years, buried under contracts and construction projects and carefully maintained emotional distance. Elena Sawyer had ripped that burial shroud away with a single, unauthorized transaction. Marcus picked up his phone and called the hotel's front desk. It rang 4 times before a male voice answered. Not Elena. "This is Marcus Thornton in the penthouse suite," he said. "I need to speak with your manager immediately." "Of course, Mr. Thornton. May I ask what this is regarding?" Marcus looked at his reflection in the dark window, at the man he'd become, successful, powerful, and utterly alone. "Employee misconduct," he said finally, "and I want it dealt with tonight." Monica Chen had been the guest services manager at the Ashford Hotel for 12 years, and in that time, she'd handled every conceivable crisis. Flooded rooms, celebrity meltdowns, even a proposal gone spectacularly wrong when the ring fell down a heating vent. But as she hurried through the lobby at 9:47 p.m., summoned by an urgent call from Marcus Thornton himself, she felt a particular kind of dread settling in her stomach. Elena stood behind the reception desk, her face composed but her hands clasped tightly together. A tell Monica had learned to recognize in her 3 weeks of training the young woman. Something had gone very wrong. "My office," Monica said quietly as she passed the desk. "Now." Elena nodded and followed, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. They passed through a discreet door marked Staff Only and down a carpeted hallway to Monica's small but efficient office. The walls were decorated with commendations from the hotel chain and photos from various hospitality conferences. A career built on precision, protocol, and never ever giving guests a reason to complain. Monica closed the door and turned to face Elena, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Thornton called me personally. He says you used his credit card without authorization. Please tell me there's some misunderstanding." Elena's composure cracked slightly. "There's no misunderstanding. I found his black card on the desk after he went upstairs. Instead of just securing it, I made a donation with it." "A donation?" Monica's voice was flat, processing. "To what?" "The Sarah Thornton Foundation, his late wife's charity for childhood cancer research." Elena met Monica's eyes. $50,000. Monica sat down heavily in her desk chair, removing her glasses to rub her temples. "Elena, tell me you're joking. Please tell me this is some kind of terrible joke." "I'm not joking. Do you understand what you've done?" Monica's voice rose despite her best efforts at control. "That's not just misconduct, that's credit card fraud. That's a felony. You could go to prison." "I know." Elena's voice was steady now, resigned. "But I don't regret the donation itself, only that I didn't ask permission first." Monica stared at her for a long moment, trying to comprehend the logic. "Why? Why would you throw away your career, risk criminal charges for—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Help me understand, because right now, I'm trying to figure out if I should call the police myself or wait for Mr. Thornton to do it." Elena moved to the chair across from Monica's desk and sat down slowly, as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. 3 weeks ago, before I started here, I was volunteering at Children's Hospital in Cambridge. There was a little girl in the oncology ward, Sophie, 7 years old, completely bald from chemo, but she had this smile. Elena's voice caught. Her mother told me that the Sarah Thornton Foundation had paid for Sophie's entire treatment, that without it, they would have lost their home, their savings, everything, that Sophie would probably be dead. Monica listened, her expression softening slightly despite herself. "I did research that night," Elena continued, "about Sarah Thornton, about what she built, about how she died coming home from a fundraising event for that foundation, and about how her husband, this billionaire who has more money than most people can imagine, completely abandoned it after her death. He funds it, sure, but he won't attend events, won't speak about it, won't even acknowledge its existence publicly." "So you decided to force his hand?" Monica asked quietly. "I decided to remind him," Elena said, "that his wife's legacy is saving lives every single day, that maybe, just maybe, he'd want to be part of that instead of hiding from it." Monica leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Elena, that's not your decision to make. These guests, people like Marcus Thornton, they come here specifically because we don't make decisions for them. We don't judge them, we don't counsel them, and we certainly don't use their money to teach them life lessons." "I know," Elena whispered. "I know I crossed every line, but when I held that card in my hands, all I could think about was Sophie's face when I read to her, and I thought, what if he's forgotten? What if he needs someone to break through those walls he's built?" The office phone rang, making both women jump. Monica picked it up. "Guest services, this is Monica Chen." Elena watched as Monica's expression shifted. Surprise, then concern, then something that looked almost like respect. "Yes, Mr. Thornton, I understand. She's here with me now." A pause. "You want to?" "I see. Yes, of course, I'll bring her up immediately." Monica hung up and looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He wants to see you. In his suite. Right now." Elena felt her stomach drop. "Is he pressing charges?" "He didn't say." "But Elena..." Monica stood, her voice taking on a note of genuine concern. "Be careful up there. Marcus Thornton isn't known for his patience or his forgiveness. If he wants to see you in person, it's either to make absolutely sure you understand the consequences before he destroys your life or..." She trailed off. "Or what?" Monica shook her head. "I don't know, just be honest. It's the only card you have left to play." The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending to an execution. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the polished brass doors. 26 years old, wearing a uniform she'd been so proud of 3 weeks ago, about to face the consequences of the most impulsive decision of her life. The doors opened directly into the penthouse suite's private foyer. Elena stepped out onto thick carpet, taking in the minimalist luxury of the space. Through an archway she could see Marcus Thornton standing at the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. The city glittered beyond him, the rain finally beginning to ease. "Mr. Thornton?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. He didn't turn around. "Close the elevator." Elena pressed the button and the doors slid shut behind her, sealing her in. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "Do you know what my wife was doing the night she died?" Marcus's voice was controlled, almost conversational, but Elena could hear the razor edge beneath it. "She was coming home from a fundraising gala," Elena said quietly. "A fundraising gala that I told her to skip." Now he turned and Elena saw his face. Not angry, but haunted. "We had a fight that morning. I told her she was killing herself with these events, running herself into the ground for a foundation that would survive without her for one night. She said I didn't understand, that these children needed advocates, needed people who wouldn't give up on them." He moved away from the window, closer to Elena, but not threatening, just present, forcing her to witness his pain. She left angry. "We didn't say goodbye properly. And 6 hours later, I got a call from Boston police telling me my wife was dead because some kid was texting his girlfriend instead of watching the road." Marcus's jaw clenched. "The foundation she died for raised $2 million that night. I've always wondered if she thought it was worth it in those last seconds before impact." Elena felt tears burning her eyes. "Mr. Thornton, I don't want your apology." He cut her off. "I want you to understand what you did tonight. You took my money. Yes, my money, don't pretend it was about the donation. And you forced me to look at something I've spent 7 years trying not to see. My wife's name, her foundation, the life she chose over safety, over me, over our daughter. She didn't choose it over you," Elena said, finding her voice. "She chose to save lives. That's not the same thing." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You've known about my wife for 3 weeks and you think you understand her better than I did after 15 years of marriage?" "No," Elena said firmly. "But I understand what her foundation does. I've seen it. Sophie is alive because of it. 847 children are alive because of it. And maybe," she took a breath, knowing she was about to cross another line but unable to stop herself. "Maybe your wife would be heartbroken to know that you've spent 7 years treating her legacy like a ghost you're afraid to face." The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and true. Marcus's expression shifted through several emotions: anger, grief, and finally something that looked almost like surrender. He moved to the bar cart and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to Elena. His hand shook slightly as he did. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the modern sofa. It wasn't a request. Elena sat, holding the water glass like a lifeline. Marcus took the chair across from her, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. "After Sarah died, my daughter Lily wanted to stay involved with the foundation," he said, his voice quieter now. "She was 15. She just lost her mother and she clung to the foundation like it was the last piece of Sarah she had left. She wanted to attend board meetings, volunteer at events, keep her mother's work alive." "What happened?" Elena asked softly. "I forbade it." Marcus looked down at his glass. "I told her she needed to focus on school, on healing, on moving forward. What I really meant was that I couldn't bear to watch her walk the same path that got her mother killed. So I wrote checks, hired administrators to run the foundation, and cut all personal ties to it." "And your daughter?" "Lily stopped speaking to me 6 months later. She's 22 now, finishing her master's degree at Columbia. We exchange emails on birthdays and holidays, that's it." He looked up at Elena. "I built a billion-dollar empire while my daughter grew up essentially orphaned. So please, tell me again how you were trying to help by bringing all of this back." Elena set down her water glass, her hands steadier now. "Mr. Thornton, I can't defend what I did. It was wrong, it was illegal, and I accept whatever consequences come from it. But I can tell you this. I met Sophie 3 weeks ago, and when her mother talked about the foundation that saved her life, she cried. She said they'd lost everything and thought they were going to lose their daughter too. The foundation didn't just pay for treatment, it paid for hope." She leaned forward slightly. "Your wife built something that outlived her, something that keeps saving lives every single day. And maybe the tragedy isn't that she died for it. Maybe the tragedy is that you're so determined to punish yourself for surviving that you can't see the beauty of what she left behind." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and walked to his laptop on the desk. "Come here." Elena stood and approached cautiously. Marcus pulled up the foundation's website, clicking through pages of statistics, testimonials, Photos of children who'd beaten cancer, thanks to the foundation's support. 847 children, he said quietly. I knew the endowment I created kept the foundation running, but I never looked at the actual numbers, the actual lives. He scrolled to a gallery of photos from recent events. Volunteers reading to children in hospital wards, families celebrating the end of treatment, researchers accepting grants for new therapies. In several photos, Elena noticed the same thing. A young woman with Sarah Thornton's eyes, handing out teddy bears to bald children, her smile bright and genuine. Is that Lily? Elena asked softly. Marcus's hand stilled on the mouse. What? In these photos. The volunteer with the dark hair. She looks like your wife. Marcus enlarged one of the photos, and Elena watched his face transform as he recognized his daughter. She's volunteering for the foundation? It looks like she never stopped, Elena said gently. She just stopped telling you about it. Marcus sat down heavily in the desk chair, staring at the screen. His daughter, the child he'd pushed away to protect, had spent the last 7 years doing exactly what he'd forbidden her to do, keeping her mother's legacy alive. The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more contemplative. Finally, Marcus spoke without looking away from the screen. I'm not pressing charges. Elena's breath caught. Mr. Thornton, but you're fired, effective immediately. Now he did turn to face her. What you did was inexcusable, regardless of your intentions. I can't let that stand without consequences. Elena nodded, tears finally spilling over. I understand. However, Marcus stood, and Elena saw something new in his expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The donation stands. Consider it my first public contribution to the foundation in 7 years. And Miss Sawyer? Yes? Thank you for reminding me that some walls are prisons, not protection. Elena walked through the rainy Boston streets at 11:30 p.m., her uniform still on, her badge already surrendered to Monica's desk. The city was quieter now, just the hiss of tires on wet pavement and the occasional laugh from late-night bar patrons. She should have felt devastated. She'd just lost her job, narrowly avoided criminal charges, and torpedoed what had been a promising career in hospitality. Instead, she felt oddly at peace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her roommate, Jess. You okay? It's late. Elena typed back. Long story. Tell you when I get home. She stopped at a crosswalk, watching the red hand blink on the other side of the street. Behind her, the financial district's towers stretched into the low clouds, their windows like scattered stars. Somewhere up there, Marcus Thornton was staring at photos of his daughter, maybe finally beginning to understand what he'd lost by building walls instead of bridges. The light changed, and Elena crossed, her mind already turning to practical matters. She'd need to update her resume, start job hunting immediately. Her savings could cover maybe 2 months of rent if she was careful. Monica had been kind enough not to document the firing as for cause. Officially, it would just show as a resignation, though Elena suspected the hotel industry was small enough that word would spread. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena almost ignored it, then answered on impulse. Hello? Elena Sawyer? A woman's voice, young, slightly hesitant. Yes. This is Elena. This is Lily Thornton, I think. I think we need to talk. Elena stopped walking, nearly causing a man behind her to bump into her. How did you get my number? My father called me 20 minutes ago. First real conversation we've had in 6 years. Lily's voice was thick with emotion. He told me what you did, the donation, what you said to him, and I looked you up, found your LinkedIn, got your number from a mutual connection. I hope that's not creepy. No, it's fine. Elena moved to the side of the sidewalk out of the flow of foot traffic. Is your father okay? I don't know, Lily said honestly. He spent the whole call apologizing, talking about my mother, about the foundation, about how he didn't realize I'd been volunteering there. He was crying, Elena. I haven't heard my father cry since Mom's funeral. Elena's own throat tightened. I'm sorry if I caused... Don't apologize. Lily's voice was fierce now. Whatever you did, however you did it, you broke through to him. Do you know how many years I've been trying to reach him? How many letters I wrote that he never really responded to? How many times I invited him to foundation events that he never attended? He was protecting himself, Elena said quietly, from the pain of losing your mother. He was protecting himself so well that he lost me too, Lily said. But tonight, for the first time since I was 15 years old, I heard my father actually feel something. So thank you. Whatever it cost you, thank you. They talked for another 10 minutes, standing in different parts of the same city. Two women connected by a man who'd spent 7 years disconnecting from everything. Lily told her about the foundation's work, about the children she'd met, about keeping her mother's memory alive the only way she knew how. Elena told her about Sophie, about the impulse that had led to the donation, about losing her job, but somehow feeling like it had been worth it. When they finally said goodbye, Elena continued her walk home with a strange warmth in her chest despite the cold rain. She'd been fired, yes, but she'd also cracked something open that had needed cracking for 7 years. 3 blocks from her apartment, her phone buzzed again, this time an email from Marcus Thornton. Elena stopped under a streetlight to read it, her heart hammering. Subject, proposal. Miss Sawyer, what you did tonight was inappropriate, unprofessional, and technically illegal. It was also the most honest thing anyone has done for me in 7 years. I've spent the last hour on the phone with my daughter, a conversation that wouldn't have happened without your intervention. I've also spent that time looking at the foundation's work, really looking at it for the first time since my wife died. You mentioned meeting a child named Sophie. I would like to meet her if her family is willing. I would also like to understand more about the foundation's current needs, its future goals, and how I can be more than just a checkbook for my late wife's legacy. I need someone who understands the foundation's mission, who isn't afraid to challenge me, and who can help me reconnect with work that matters. The position would be personal liaison between myself and the Sarah Thornton Foundation, essentially translating the foundation's needs and helping me engage with it in a meaningful way. The salary would be competitive, the work would be challenging, and I imagine it would be complicated, given how we met. But if you're interested in turning tonight's disaster into something productive, I'd like to discuss it. I'm meeting with Lily for breakfast tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the Bristol Lounge. If you choose to join us, we can talk specifics. Regards, Marcus Thornton. Elena read the email 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. He was offering her a job? After firing her? After she'd committed fraud with his credit card? She looked up at the rain-soaked street, at the city that had been her home for 2 years, at the life she'd thought was falling apart just hours ago. Then she typed a response. Mr. Thornton, I'll be there. Elena. The Bristol Lounge was the kind of restaurant where power brokers made deals over poached eggs and politicians kissed donors' rings under crystal chandeliers. Elena arrived at 8:55 a.m., wearing her only business suit, navy blue, slightly outdated but professional enough. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning through possible conversations, potential disasters, the sheer impossibility of what was about to happen. Marcus sat at a corner table, somehow managing to make jeans and a sweater look expensive. But it was the woman across from him who captured Elena's attention, mid-20s with dark hair and her mother's warm brown eyes, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Lily Thornton, in person, was even more vibrant than her photos suggested. Marcus saw Elena and stood, a gesture of respect that surprised her. Miss Sawyer, thank you for coming. Lily turned and smiled, genuine, bright, without any of the guardedness Elena had expected. Elena, I feel like I already know you. She stood, and to Elena's shock, hugged her. Thank you, she whispered, for being brave enough to be reckless. They sat, and a server appeared to take Elena's order. She requested coffee and toast, her stomach too knotted for anything more substantial. I've spent the morning filling Lily in on last night's events, Marcus said once the server left, and she's been filling me in on 7 years of foundation work I knew nothing about. Dad came to volunteer hours yesterday, Lily said, her eyes bright. Can you believe it? He showed up at the hospital at 7 a.m. unannounced and asked if he could read to the kids in the oncology ward. Elena looked at Marcus, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I wanted to understand what you saw. What made you think donating my money without permission was worth the risk? And? Elena asked carefully. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. There was a boy, 8 years old, named David. Leukemia. He was so weak, he could barely hold the book, but he insisted on turning the pages himself. His voice caught slightly. He asked if I knew Sarah Thornton, said she was his hero, even though she died before he was born, because the foundation she started was why he was still alive. Lily reached across the table and squeezed her father's hand, a gesture so simple, so profound, that Elena had to look away. I've been a coward, Marcus said quietly. I told myself I was protecting Lily, protecting myself by staying distant from the foundation. The truth is I was just afraid. afraid that engaging with Sarah's work would make losing her real again, as if by ignoring it, I could somehow keep her death at arm's length. "You weren't a coward, Dad," Lily said gently. "You were grieving. There's a difference." "Maybe." Marcus looked up at Elena. "But Miss Sawyer here, someone who had no stake in my life, no connection to my family, who risked her entire career. She had the courage to do what no one else would. She forced me to look at what I was running from." Elena shook her head. "Mr. Thornton, what I did was impulsive and illegal. I don't deserve credit for—" "You absolutely deserve credit," Lily interrupted. "Do you know how many people in my father's life just nod and agree with everything he says? How many yes men and sycophants surround him every day? You're the first person in years who had the guts to tell him he was wrong." The food arrived and they ate in contemplative silence for a few moments. Then Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at Elena. "Here's what I'm proposing. The foundation needs a bridge. Someone who understands both the operational side and can translate that to me in ways I'll actually engage with. Someone who won't let me hide or make excuses. Someone who, frankly, scares me a little because I know she won't tolerate my bullshit." Despite herself, Elena laughed. "The role would involve coordinating between the Foundation's executive director and myself," Marcus continued. "Arranging site visits, preparing briefings on children we're helping, organizing events I should attend, and generally making sure I stay connected to the work. You'd also help me reconnect with Lily's involvement. She's been doing this alone for too long." "I've been doing it with the other volunteers," Lily corrected. "But having Dad involved would mean everything." Elena looked between them. This father and daughter who'd spent years orbiting each other in grief, now tentatively reaching across that distance. "Why me? You could hire someone with actual experience in nonprofit work, someone without a criminal record." "You don't have a criminal record," Marcus said. "I never reported it, remember?" "Still, why me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Because you did something last night that no rational person would do. You saw a wrong, my disconnection from my wife's legacy, and you decided to fix it. Consequences be damned. That kind of irrational courage is exactly what I need. Someone who cares more about doing right than playing it safe. Plus," Lily added with a grin, "you're probably the only person on earth who could call my father out when he starts retreating into his walls again. You've already proven you're not afraid of him." Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was insane. Taking a job from the man whose credit card she'd fraudulently used less than 24 hours ago? Working as a liaison for a foundation connected to so much grief and loss? It violated every principle of playing it safe that she'd lived by her entire life. But then she thought of Sophie's smile, of David turning pages with weak hands, of 847 children alive because one woman had built something beautiful and refused to let it die with her. "What's the salary?" Elena asked. Marcus named a figure that made her coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. It was more than double what she'd been making at the hotel. That's incredibly generous," she managed. "It's what the position is worth," Marcus said simply. "And Elena, I can call you Elena?" She nodded. "This won't be easy. I'm difficult to work with. I'll resist. I'll make excuses. I'll probably try to retreat back into my comfortable distance. Your job will be to not let me. To drag me to hospital visits and fundraisers and board meetings until engaging with this work becomes second nature instead of torture. Can you do that?" Elena thought about it. Really thought about it. Could she work for a man this complicated, this wounded, this rich and powerful and fundamentally broken? Could she stand between his grief and his late wife's legacy, trying to build a bridge? She looked at Lily, whose eyes shone with hope. She thought of Marcus at the window last night, finally allowing himself to feel. She remembered Sophie's mother saying, "They saved our lives." "I can do that," Elena said. "On one condition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating? You meet Sophie and her mother, and you hear firsthand what the foundation means to families who have nothing left but hope." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Deal. When can you arrange it?" "I'll call the hospital today," Elena said. "If Sophie's up for visitors, we could go tomorrow." They shook hands across the table. Marcus's grip firm, professional, but with a tremor that betrayed his emotion. Lily beamed at both of them. "Welcome to the team," she said to Elena. "Fair warning, we're all a little broken here, but we're trying to fix it." Elena smiled, feeling the rightness of this impossible decision settling into her bones. Broken things can still be beautiful. Your mother proved that. Outside the Bristol lounge, The morning rain had given way to weak November sunshine. Elena stood on the sidewalk with her new employers, because that's what they were now, she realized, with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, and watched the city come alive around them. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the employment contract," Marcus said. "You can start as soon as you've reviewed it, and I'll introduce you to the rest of the volunteer team this week," Lily added. "They're going to love you." As they parted ways, Elena walking toward the tea station while Marcus and Lily headed to his car, she heard Lily's voice drift back. "I like her, Dad. She's got fire." Marcus's response was quieter, but Elena caught it. "She reminds me of your mother. Terrifyingly brave and completely unreasonable." It sounded like the highest compliment he knew how to give. The children's oncology ward at Cambridge General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and hope, an odd combination that Elena had come to recognize during her volunteer hours. She walked beside Marcus through the brightly painted corridors, past walls covered with handprints in every color imaginable, each one labeled with a child's name and the date they'd completed treatment. Marcus had been silent during the entire drive from his office, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. Now, walking through these halls, Elena watched him take in every detail: the bald children being pushed in wheelchairs by smiling nurses, the parents dozing in uncomfortable chairs outside patient rooms, the teenagers with IV poles shuffling toward the common area, their steps slow but determined. "Sophie's in room 304, Elena said softly, checking her phone where Sophie's mother Jennifer had texted directions. "She's having a good day, her counts are up, and she's been asking about the book lady coming to visit." Marcus stopped walking. Maybe this was a mistake. Elena turned to face him, blocking the hallway. They'd already had this conversation 3 times. Once when she'd first proposed the visit, once in the car, and now here, 50 feet from Sophie's room. "Mr. Thornton, Marcus," he corrected quietly. "If we're going to work together, it's Marcus." "Marcus," Elena amended. "You can do this. Sophie is just a little girl who wants to meet the man whose foundation saved her life. You're not here to fix anything or say anything profound. You're just here to see what your wife built." "What if I can't?" He stopped, struggling with the words. "What if seeing her makes it worse?" Elena understood what he wasn't saying. What if seeing this sick child made him think of his daughter at that age? What if it brought back Sarah's death? What if opening himself up to this work meant opening himself up to pain he'd spent 7 years avoiding? "Then it makes it worse," Elena said gently. "And you feel it, and you survive it, and you come back anyway. That's what courage is, Marcus. Not the absence of fear, but doing what matters despite it." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his steel-gray eyes. Then he nodded and continued walking. Room 304 was decorated like a 7-year-old's fever dream of paradise. Disney princess posters competing with superhero decals, a collection of stuffed animals occupying every available surface, and drawings taped to the walls that showed a progression from before treatment, a little girl with pigtails holding her mother's hand, to during treatment, the same girl now bald, surrounded by hearts and rainbows, to after treatment, the girl with short hair growing back, arms raised in victory. Sophie sat in bed, a pink headscarf covering her head, working on a coloring book. She was tiny, made smaller by the oversized hospital gown and the medical equipment surrounding her. But when she saw Elena, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made Elena's chest ache. "Book lady?" Sophie set down her crayons and reached out for a hug. Elena moved to the bedside and embraced the little girl carefully, mindful of the IV line in her arm. "Hi, Sophie. I brought someone to meet you. Is that okay?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically, then noticed Marcus standing awkward and uncertain in the doorway. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Thornton," Elena said. "Remember the foundation that paid for your treatment? The Sarah Thornton Foundation? This is Sarah's husband." Sophie's eyes went wide. "You knew Sarah Thornton? She's my hero." Marcus stepped into the room, and Elena saw him struggling to compose himself. "She was my hero too," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "And she would have loved meeting you, Sophie." Jennifer appeared from the bathroom, drying her hands. She was in her mid-30s but looked older, worn down by months of fear and sleepless nights. When she saw Marcus, recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion and then overwhelming emotion. "Mr. Thornton?" Jennifer's voice shook. "I didn't know. Elena didn't say." "I wanted to meet Sophie," Marcus said simply, "to understand what the foundation does, to see who we're helping." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "You saved our daughter's life. We'd sold everything, our house, our car, my wedding ring, just to pay for the first round of treatment. We were weeks away from having to stop therapy because we couldn't afford it anymore. Then the foundation stepped in and she couldn't continue, emotion overwhelming her. Marcus looked lost, clearly unused to being confronted with such raw gratitude. Elena gently touched his arm, grounding him. "Can I show you something?" Sophie asked, oblivious to the adults' emotional exchange. She reached for a scrapbook on her nightstand, flipping it open to a page filled with photos and drawings. "This is my Sarah Thornton book. Mommy helped me make it." Marcus moved closer, and Sophie proudly showed him pages documenting the foundation's history. Printouts from the website, newspaper articles about fundraising events, photos of Sarah at various galas. In the center spread was the photo Elena had seen online. Sarah and Marcus at that final fundraiser. Sarah's smile radiant, Marcus's arm around her waist. "She was really pretty," Sophie said, touching the photo gently. "And Mommy says she had cancer when she was little too, just like me. But she beat it and then she helped other kids beat it." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the photo. "Yes," he managed. "She did." "Did she have the yucky medicine too? The kind that makes your hair fall out?" "She did," Marcus said, his voice steadier now. "When she was 9 years old. It was scary, but she was brave. Just like you." Sophie beamed at the comparison. "I'm trying to be brave. Some days are harder than others. But Mommy says brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you keep going even when you are scared." Elena saw Marcus close his eyes briefly, and she knew he was thinking of his wife, of his daughter, of all the years he'd spent not being brave. "Your mommy is very wise," Marcus said. "And you're very brave, Sophie. Braver than most adults I know." They spent the next hour in that hospital room, with Sophie showing Marcus her coloring books, telling him about the other kids on the ward, explaining the complex schedule of treatments and tests with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd grown up too fast. Jennifer shared their story, the diagnosis that came out of nowhere, the desperate scramble for money, the moment the foundation's letter arrived saying they'd cover all remaining costs. "I don't know how to thank you," Jennifer said to Marcus as they prepared to leave. "Words aren't enough for what you've given us. Sophie has a future now. We have hope." Marcus shook his head. "This wasn't me. This is all my wife's work. I've just been funding it from a distance. But you're here now," Jennifer said, squeezing his hand. "That matters too." Outside Sophie's room, Marcus leaned against the wall, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Elena stood beside him silently, giving him space to process. "Sarah had cancer at 9, Marcus said quietly. "Hodgkin's lymphoma. She almost died. Her parents spent everything they had on treatment, went into debt they never fully recovered from. When she survived, she promised herself that no parent should have to choose between saving their child and financial ruin. She kept that promise," Elena said. "She did." Marcus looked down the hallway at the other rooms, each one containing a family fighting their own battle. "And I've been so busy hiding from her memory that I forgot the point wasn't to protect myself from pain. The point was to honor what she built." His phone buzzed, probably the 10th call from his office that he'd been ignoring. Marcus glanced at it, then deliberately turned it off. "Show me more. I want to meet the other children. I want to understand the full scope of what the foundation does." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Pride, maybe, or hope. "There are 12 children on this ward right now receiving foundation support. We can meet as many as are up for visitors." They spent the next 3 hours moving from room to room. Marcus met Emma, a 13-year-old with osteosarcoma who wanted to be a doctor someday. He met twins Alex and Aiden, battling the same rare leukemia, who finished each other's sentences and made jokes about their matching bald heads. He met Isaiah, a teenager who played guitar and wrote songs about his treatment journey, who performed one for Marcus with quiet intensity. Each child had a story. Each family had reached a breaking point where hope seemed impossible, until the foundation stepped in, and each one knew Sarah Thornton's name, knew her story, carried her legacy forward simply by surviving. By the time they left the hospital, Marcus looked exhausted, but somehow more alive than Elena had seen him. They stood in the parking lot as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, warming the cold November air. "I need to call Lily," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "She should have been here for this." "She volunteers here every Wednesday," Elena said. "She's probably met most of these kids. You could come with her next week." Marcus nodded slowly, processing the idea of his daughter doing this work without him, keeping her mother's legacy alive while he hid from it. I've missed so much. 7 years of watching her grow into someone who honors her mother's memory in ways I never could. You can't get those years back, Elena said honestly, but you can be present for what comes next. Marcus's phone rang, Lily's name on the screen. He answered, and Elena watched his face soften in a way she hadn't seen before. Lily, I just left Cambridge General. I met Sophie and Emma and the twins. You were right about all of it. I need to be more involved. Elena couldn't hear Lily's response, but she saw its effect on Marcus. A smile, genuine and unrehearsed, that transformed his face from austere businessman to grieving father trying to find his way back. I want to attend the next board meeting, Marcus said into the phone, and the fundraiser in December, and I want to do this together. You and me, like we should have been doing all along. A pause. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. He hung up and looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something like wonder. She's been waiting 7 years to hear me say that I want to be involved. Then it's a good thing you finally said it, Elena replied. They drove back to the city in comfortable silence, the weight of the hospital visit settling over both of them. When Marcus pulled up to Elena's apartment building, he turned off the engine and sat for a moment staring at the steering wheel. When I hired you, if you can call it that given the circumstances, I thought I was doing it as some kind of penance. A way to force myself to engage with the foundation because I knew I should, not because I wanted to. He looked up at Elena. But today, meeting those kids, seeing what Sarah built, I didn't feel obligated. I felt honored to be connected to this work, to these families. Is that strange? Not strange at all, Elena said softly. That's exactly what your wife wanted you to feel. That's why she built the foundation in the first place. Marcus nodded, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Employment contract. My lawyer drew it up today. Look it over, ask questions if you have them, and if you're still willing to take on this impossible job, sign and return it. Elena took the folder, feeling the weight of the decision, literal and metaphorical, in her hands. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. That night at the hotel when you found out what I'd done, you could have destroyed me. Had me arrested, blacklisted, made sure I never worked again. Why didn't you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the steering wheel though the car was off. Because in that moment when you stood there and admitted what you'd done and why, you reminded me of Sarah. She would have done something exactly that reckless if she thought it would save someone or make them see what they were missing. He turned to look at Elena directly. My wife was the bravest person I ever knew. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she did what mattered despite her fear. I've spent 7 years being the opposite of that, letting fear dictate every decision, every relationship, every moment. When you took my credit card and forced me to see what I'd been running from, you gave me a chance to be brave again. I wasn't about to punish you for that gift. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Thank you for the second chance, for trusting me with this. Thank you, Marcus replied, for refusing to let me hide. Now go read that contract. We have a lot of work to do. Elena climbed out of the car and watched Marcus drive away, the folder clutched to her chest. Inside her apartment, her roommate Jess was waiting with wide eyes and a bottle of wine. Okay, I need the full story, Jess demanded. You get fired from the hotel, disappear for 2 days, and then text me that you have a new job working for a billionaire? What the hell happened? Elena poured them both wine and told the story. All of it, from finding the black card to the donation, to the confrontation, to the impossible job offer, to today's hospital visit. Jess listened with increasing disbelief, occasionally interrupting with exclamations of, "You did what?" and "That's insane." When Elena finished, Jess sat back on the couch, shaking her head. So let me get this straight. You committed credit card fraud, got fired, and somehow ended up with a better job and a higher salary than before? When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous, Elena admitted. It is ridiculous, Jess laughed, but also kind of amazing. I mean, you literally changed this guy's life, and his daughter's life, and you're going to help save more kids like Sophie. She raised her glass. To my insane roommate who somehow made grand larceny into a career move. They clinked glasses, and Elena felt the reality of it all finally sinking in. She'd gambled everything on a moment of impulse, and somehow, impossibly, it had worked out. Not perfectly. She'd still lost her hotel job, still damaged her reputation in hospitality, but in a way that felt meaningful, purposeful, like she'd stumbled into exactly where she was supposed to be. Later that night, Elena opened the employment contract, and read through its terms. The salary was generous, the benefits comprehensive, but it was the job description that made her pause. Position: Personal Liaison, Sarah Thornton Foundation. Primary responsibility: facilitate meaningful engagement between Marcus Thornton and the Foundation's mission, ensuring sustained involvement in Foundation activities, events, and strategic planning. Secondary responsibilities include coordinating with Foundation leadership, arranging site visits, and providing honest feedback regarding Mr. Thornton's engagement and emotional well-being as it relates to Foundation work. The last line made her smile. This position requires exceptional courage, unwavering honesty, and a willingness to challenge authority when necessary. Elena pulled out a pen and signed her name at the bottom. She was 26 years old, had been in Boston for 2 years, and had just signed on to help a grieving billionaire reconnect with his late wife's legacy and his estranged daughter. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was exactly right. 3 months later, the Boston winter had settled in with its characteristic brutality: gray skies, biting wind, and snow that turned to slush within hours. But inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, warmth and light pushed back against the December cold. The Sarah Thornton Foundation's annual gala was in full swing, with over 300 guests mingling beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations and laughter creating a symphony of hope and generosity. Elena stood near the edge of the ballroom, clipboard in hand, checking off items from her event coordinator's list. In 3 months, her role had evolved far beyond what the initial job description had outlined. She'd become not just Marcus's liaison to the Foundation, but a bridge between past and present, between grief and healing, between a man who'd forgotten how to feel and the work that demanded he feel everything. "You look stressed," Lily said, appearing at Elena's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Here, doctor's orders." Elena took the glass gratefully. "I'm not stressed. I'm just making sure everything goes perfectly. Your father's about to give his first public speech about the Foundation in 7 years. That's a lot of pressure." "He'll be fine," Lily said, though Elena caught the nervousness in her voice. "You've prepared him well. And besides, he's Marcus Thornton. The man once gave a presentation to hostile shareholders while running a fever of 103. He can handle this." But this was different, and they both knew it. Business presentations were Marcus's armor. Facts, figures, projections he could control. Tonight's speech required vulnerability, emotion, the willingness to stand before 300 people and talk about the wife he'd lost and the years he'd wasted running from her memory. Elena scanned the ballroom and found Marcus near the silent auction tables, talking with the Foundation's executive director, Dr. Catherine Welsh. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his silver-touched hair swept back, but Elena had learned to read the subtle tells, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand occasionally moved to his pocket where he kept a photo of Sarah, the slight tightness around his eyes that meant he was fighting emotion. The past 3 months had been transformative and turbulent in equal measure. Marcus had thrown himself into Foundation work with the same intensity he brought to his business empire, attending board meetings, visiting children in hospitals, personally reviewing grant applications. But the work had cost him too. Sleepless nights, moments of overwhelming grief, days when the weight of what he'd lost threatened to crush him. Elena had been there for all of it, learning to recognize when to push and when to give him space, when to offer comfort, and when to demand more. They'd developed an unusual working relationship built on brutal honesty and mutual respect. He paid her to challenge him, and she'd learned not to hold back. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang out over the sound system. "If you could please take your seats, we're about to begin our program for the evening." Elena's stomach clenched. This was it. The moment that would determine whether the past 3 months of work had truly changed Marcus, or if he'd retreat back into the safety of emotional distance. The lights dimmed slightly as guests moved to their assigned tables. Elena and Lily took their seats at the table closest to the stage, joined by Jennifer and Sophie, who was wearing a beautiful blue dress and a wig styled into princess curls, her cancer now in remission, along with several other Foundation board members. Dr. Welsh took the stage first, welcoming everyone and providing an overview of the Foundation's accomplishments over the past year. 893 children now, 45 more lives saved since Elena had made that impulsive donation. The numbers were staggering, each one representing a family that had been pulled back from the edge of despair. "And now," Dr. Welsh said, her voice warm with emotion, "I'd like to introduce someone who needs no introduction, but who deserves recognition for reasons beyond his business success. 7 years ago, when we lost Sarah Thornton, we feared we might lose her foundation too, but her husband, Marcus Thornton, ensured that her legacy continued through his financial support, even when his grief made direct involvement impossible. Elena watched Marcus shift in his seat at a nearby table, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. This year, however, something remarkable happened. Dr. Welsh continued. Marcus didn't just support the foundation from a distance, he came back to us. He's visited children in hospitals, attended every board meeting, personally reviewed strategic plans, and reminded us all why Sarah's work matters so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcus Thornton. The applause was thunderous as Marcus stood and made his way to the stage. Elena's heart hammered in her chest, and she felt Lily's hand find hers under the table, squeezing tight. Marcus stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces, and for a terrifying moment Elena thought he might freeze. Then his eyes found their table, found Lily, found Elena, found Sophie, and something in his expression softened. 7 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady but not distant. My wife Sarah died on her way home from this very event. A fundraiser just like this one where she'd spent the evening talking about childhood cancer research and the families we could help. She was exhausted but happy, and the last words she said to me were in a text message. We raised $2 million tonight. These kids are going to make it, Marcus. We're making a difference. The ballroom had gone completely silent. For 7 years I've been angry at that text, Marcus continued. Angry that she'd prioritized this work over her own safety, over coming home to me and our daughter. Angry that her last thoughts were about saving other people's children instead of protecting herself. Angry that she'd left us for something that, in my grief, I couldn't see the value of anymore. Elena saw several people in the audience wiping their eyes. Lily's grip on her hand tightened. But 3 months ago someone did something that forced me to see what I'd been refusing to look at. Marcus's eyes found Elena. Someone made a donation in my name, without my permission, I should add, that broke through the walls I'd built around my grief. And that unauthorized donation led me to a hospital room where I met a 7-year-old girl named Sophie, who's here with us tonight. Sophie waved enthusiastically and nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Sophie told me that Sarah Thornton was her hero, Marcus said. A woman she'd never met who died before Sophie was even born, but whose foundation had saved Sophie's life when her family had run out of money and options. And I realized something in that moment. Sarah didn't die for this foundation, she lived for it. And the tragedy wasn't that she was doing this work when she died. The tragedy was that I'd spent 7 years treating her legacy like a ghost, instead of the living, breathing miracle it actually is. Marcus paused, visibly composing himself. This foundation has saved 893 children, 893 futures that wouldn't exist without Sarah's vision and determination, 893 families that still have hope, because my wife refused to accept that financial hardship should determine which children live and which children die. He looked directly at Lily now. My daughter has been volunteering with this foundation for 7 years, keeping her mother's memory alive while I hid from mine. She embodies everything Sarah taught her about courage, compassion, and showing up even when it hurts. Lily, I'm sorry it took me so long to join you in this work, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Lily's tears were flowing freely and Elena's weren't far behind. Tonight I'm announcing a personal commitment, Marcus said, his voice stronger now. A $50 million endowment to the Sarah Thornton Foundation, designated for research into pediatric cancer treatments and family support services. But more than that, I'm committing myself, my time, my attention, my presence, because Sarah was right. These kids are going to make it. We're making a difference. And I finally understand that the best way to honor her memory isn't to hide from it, but to finish what she started. The applause was deafening. People rose to their feet and Marcus stood at the podium accepting what he'd avoided for 7 years. Recognition, gratitude, connection. When he finally stepped down from the stage, Lily met him halfway and threw her arms around him, both of them crying openly now. Elena hung back, giving them their moment, but Marcus looked over Lily's shoulder and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, donor conversations, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing something broken begin to heal. By the time the last guest departed and the ballroom staff began breaking down tables, Elena was exhausted but deeply content. She stood near the silent auction tables, reviewing final bid sheets, when Marcus approached with 2 glasses of champagne. You left before we could toast, he said, handing her a glass. You were busy being swarmed by admirers, Elena replied with a smile. I didn't want to interrupt. You could never interrupt, Marcus said. Without you, none of tonight happens. You know that, right? Elena shook her head. I just gave you a push. You did the hard work, facing your grief, reconnecting with Lily, opening yourself up to this work again. A push, Marcus repeated with a slight smile. Is that what we're calling grand larceny now? Despite herself, Elena laughed. I prefer unauthorized intervention. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the staff efficiently dismantle the evening's magic. Then Marcus said quietly, I went to Sarah's grave yesterday. First time in 3 years. I told her about Sophie, about the work the foundation is doing, about Lily, and I apologized for taking so long to find my way back. What did she say? Elena asked softly. Marcus smiled, a real smile, warm and sad and hopeful all at once. Nothing, obviously, but I could imagine what she'd say. Better late than never, and stop being so dramatic about everything. She never tolerated my self-pity. She sounds like she was an incredible woman. She was, Marcus agreed. And for the first time in 7 years, I can say that without feeling like I'm drowning. I can remember her life instead of just her death. That's your doing, Elena. That's your healing, Elena corrected. I just helped you get started. Lily appeared from the coat check, bundled against the cold with Sophie and Jennifer in tow. We're heading out. Sophie's getting tired and she has a checkup tomorrow morning. Sophie ran up to Marcus and hugged his legs, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. Thank you for the pretty party, Mr. Marcus. Mommy says you're the reason I get to grow up. Marcus knelt down to Sophie's level, his tuxedo jacket pooling on the floor. Your mommy is right, but not the way she thinks. Your strength, your bravery, your refusal to give up. That's the reason you get to grow up. The foundation just helped make sure you had that chance. Will you come read to us again? Sophie asked hopefully. At the hospital? The other kids really liked your funny voices. Marcus glanced up at Elena with a look of mock accusation. You told them about the funny voices? She told everyone about the funny voices, Lily said, grinning. It's become legendary. Marcus Thornton, billionaire real estate mogul, does a surprisingly good Cookie Monster impression. I will never live that down, Marcus muttered, but he was smiling. Yes, Sophie. I'll come read again next week, I promise. After Sophie and Jennifer left, followed shortly by other lingering guests, only Marcus, Lily, and Elena remained in the emptying ballroom. They stood together near the entrance, watching snow begin to fall outside the tall windows. I've been thinking, Lily said, breaking the companionable silence. The foundation needs to expand. There are so many more families we could help if we had a larger footprint. What if we opened satellite offices in other cities? New York, Philadelphia, maybe Washington, D.C. Marcus considered this, his business mind already working through logistics. That would require significant infrastructure investment, additional staff, partnerships with hospitals in those regions. But we could save hundreds more children, Lily pressed. Maybe thousands eventually. Isn't that worth the investment? Marcus looked at his daughter, 22 years old, fierce and passionate about her mother's work, so clearly Sarah's heir in every way that mattered. Yes, he said simply. It's worth it. Let's schedule a meeting with the board next week to discuss expansion plans. Lily's face lit up with joy and she kissed her father's cheek. Mom would be so proud of you. Of us. I'm proud of us too, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Finally. Elena watched this exchange with a fullness in her chest that felt almost like grief, but warmer. The bittersweet ache of witnessing something beautiful emerging from something broken. This was why she'd taken that insane risk with the credit card. Not for recognition or reward, but for this. A family healing. A legacy thriving. Children's lives being saved. I should go, Elena said, gathering her coat and bag. Early morning tomorrow. We have 3 hospital visits scheduled. Elena, wait, Marcus said. He exchanged a look with Lily, some silent communication passing between them. Lily and I have been discussing your role with the foundation. You've been doing the work of 3 people. My liaison, event coordinator, volunteer coordinator, strategic advisor. It's too much for one person, and frankly, you're too valuable to burn out. Elena's stomach dropped. Was this the end? Had she pushed too hard, taken on too much? We want to offer you a promotion, Lily said, grinning at Elena's obvious panic. Director of Family Services and Donor Relations. It would mean a larger salary, a staff to supervise, and the authority to make decisions about how the foundation engages with both the families we serve and the donors who support us. It would also mean, Marcus added, that you'd be the bridge between the foundation's mission and its implementation, between theory and practice, between money and meaning. Nobody is better suited for that role than you. Elena felt tears threatening again, happy tears this time. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lily urged. Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing, just with more resources and support. Say you'll help us expand Mom's legacy beyond what even she imagined possible. Elena looked between them. This father and daughter who'd found their way back to each other. This family that had been shattered and was slowly, painfully, beautifully putting itself back together. She thought of Sophie's smile, of the 893 children whose lives had been saved, of the thousands more who could be saved with expansion. Yes, Elena said, her voice steady and sure. Yes to all of it. They left the ballroom together, stepping out into the snowy Boston night. The city stretched around them, full of families struggling and hoping, of children fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight, of grief and loss and the possibility of redemption. Marcus's phone buzzed with what was probably the 100th email of the evening. He glanced at it, then deliberately put it away without responding. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight I'm just present. Mom would like that, Lily said, linking her arm through his. They walked together through the snow, a billionaire who'd finally learned that wealth meant nothing without purpose, his daughter who'd carried her mother's legacy alone for too long, and a young woman who'd risked everything on the belief that broken things could heal if someone was brave enough to force them to try. Behind them, the Fairmont's windows glowed warm against the winter darkness. Inside, the foundation's banner still hung above the empty stage, the Sarah Thornton Foundation, because every child deserves a future. Sarah Thornton had died 7 years ago on a rainy November night, coming home from a fundraiser for the children she'd dedicated her life to saving. But her legacy lived on, not in grief or guilt or the billions her husband had spent trying to fill the void she'd left, but in the laughter of children like Sophie, in the dedication of volunteers like Lily, in the transformation of a man who'd forgotten how to feel until someone reminded him why feeling mattered. Elena looked back at the hotel one last time, thinking of that night 3 months ago when she'd stood behind the reception desk with Marcus Thornton's credit card in her trembling hand. That single moment of reckless courage had changed everything, not just for Marcus and Lily, but for the hundreds of families who would benefit from his renewed engagement, and for Elena herself, who'd discovered that sometimes the most important thing you could do was refuse to let someone hide from the beauty they'd helped create. The snow fell harder now, covering the city in clean white silence. Marcus hailed a cab for Elena, insisting she not take the tea this late. As she climbed in, he leaned down to the window. Same time tomorrow? He asked. Hospital visits? Then lunch with the expansion planning committee? Same time tomorrow, Elena confirmed. And Marcus? That speech tonight. Sarah would have been proud. Marcus's smile was sad but genuine. I hope so. I'm trying to become the man she believed I could be. It's taken me 7 years too long, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, Elena said. Try and show up and refuse to give up on the things that matter. The cab pulled away, carrying Elena through the snowy streets toward home. She watched the city pass by her window, this place that had witnessed her mistake and her redemption, her fear and her courage, her old life and her new purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jess. How did it go? Elena typed back. Perfect. Complicated and messy and perfect. Just like healing always was. Just like life always was. Just like love. For a cause, for lost people you were trying to help find themselves. For work that mattered more than safety or certainty. Always was. In a hospital room across the city, Sophie was asleep, her mother keeping vigil beside her, both of them dreaming of the future the Sarah Thornton Foundation had made possible. In a townhouse in Beacon Hill, Lily was texting her father goodnight, already making plans for their next volunteer day together. And in a car heading home through winter streets, Marcus Thornton was looking at a photo on his phone. Sarah at that last fundraiser, radiant and alive and completely committed to the work that had defined her life. We're making a difference, Marcus whispered to her image, echoing her last words. Just like you always knew we would. The snow continued to fall, covering old wounds and old mistakes, making everything clean and new and full of possibility. And in the morning, they would all wake up and do the work again, saving lives, healing families, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary legacies come from ordinary people who refuse to let tragedy have the final word. Because that's what Sarah Thornton had taught them all. That courage isn't the absence of fear or grief or pain. Courage is showing up anyway, believing that broken things can heal, and refusing to let the people you love, even the ones you've lost, disappear into silence and forgetting. Courage is a $50,000 donation made with a stolen credit card. Courage is a father finally saying, "I love you," after 7 years of silence. Courage is a 7-year-old girl with no hair, fighting for her life with a smile. Courage is choosing every single day to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, and then doing the work to make it so.